So, hand over to Steve, who's come all the way from Crewe to see us, especially tonight. So, thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Mike. I'm very pleased to be here and would like to thank you for inviting me. The North East Humanists have been involved with the schools in Uganda pretty well from the beginning, and Barry was instrumental in mobilizing resources for the schools right at the beginning. Let me actually just say my voice is not terribly clear and terribly loud these days. I had a thyroid tumor some years ago and I lost the use of one vocal cord. So you may find that my voice level goes down and down like this, and I'm croaking louder and louder to speak, but so the quality may go down, but I'll do my best.
Can I just stop you there, Steve, and make sure we have these things turned on?
Oh no, this one isn't turned on. That might help.
Yeah.
Okay, is that, can you pick any of that up? Yeah, okay.
Okay. So you may have to.
Okay, it was quite difficult to prepare this talk because I know a lot of you know quite a lot about the background to the schools, but I spoke to Barry on the phone a week or so ago, actually less than that, and he said there are quite a few people here who don't know the background, and he advised me to cover the whole story. So the only way I can cover the whole story is by talking very fast. Do you remember James Burke with the James Burke specials? 8:30 on a Monday, whatever night it was, where you'd listen to this phenomenal presentation of science, and then you couldn't remember anything within 5 minutes at the end of it. So it'd probably be like that tonight. But Barry and I got involved in different ways with the schools. Barry was involved, and Jean, with IHU, through IHU early on, and through the very first conference, international conference that IHU ran in East Africa. And it was when the Ugandan Humanists were formed. The very first thing they did was to invite IHU to hold the World Congress in Uganda, when they'd hardly held a meeting themselves in Uganda themselves. So it was almost their first national meeting, never mind international meeting. I was coming a slightly different way round because I've been involved with the South Cheshire and North Staffordshire Humanists. And our group, we used to meet regularly, and people would say, why are we meeting? What do we meet? We're just a talking shop. We ought to do something. And the group decided they wanted to make contact with maybe a struggling humanist group somewhere else that we could perhaps help in Asia or Africa. Well, I started my teaching career in Uganda in 1970. And so the thought of getting back to Africa was becoming important for me. I was working for the Open University at the time and was trying to wangle a way to get back to Uganda. So in 1976, no, that's wrong. In 1996, I went out to Uganda to set up a project which was eventually funded by the British Council. And I used that as an opportunity to meet some of the Ugandan humanists. And that was when our group, humanist group, decided to help them by raising some money. And we thought, well, we'll have a whip round. And we raised £400 for textbooks. And one thing led to another. And we've now got a charity which has been running since 2008. And so far this year, we've sent £96,000 to the schools. And it's not enough. They're still not, don't think they've got all the money they need, because they haven't. But they are getting there. So I want to give you a quick run through the story. The picture here on the left is, I think, a lot of people's conception of what teaching in Africa is like. You're sitting under a tree with an easel maybe. And when my wife and I went out in 1970 to teach in Uganda on a British aid scheme, we had decolonized Uganda, never having developed the education system. And there was Macmillan gave this big speech, the Winds of Change speech, going through Africa. The colonialists need to move out. We moved out because the colonies were too costly for us. They were proving to be too costly. We were not getting enough out of Uganda to warrant staying there, essentially. But we left, and I can't bring politics in, can I? There happened to be a change of government in Britain. 1964, Harold Wilson's Labour government came in, and they were left. Uganda became independent in '62 with no teacher training, very few trained teachers, the job of building schools, what Judith Hart did was set up this big scheme to send young graduates, as we were, out to Africa to provide teaching in schools and in teacher training while they trained up their own people. And so if you look at Obote, who was the president at the time, took over a lot of private schools, the good private schools, that were either religious, Catholic, Protestant, or in our case the Aga Khan School, which was a school, an Ismaili school, funded by the Aga Khan Foundation. And if you look at pictures of the staff in all the main schools in Uganda at the time, 3/4 of them were British, European, few North Americans, and one or two local Ugandans, lot of Asian teachers, Uganda Asian teachers there. But anyway, that's how we got there. And when people went to Uganda, they often found it quite difficult to get jobs coming back because they assumed we'd been sitting under trees, writing in the sand, when actually the school we taught in was a very fine day school, a much higher standard than most schools in Britain at the time. And where they, at that time and today in Uganda, they teach the sciences separately, biology, chemistry, physics, and mathematics. So the standards of science teaching in Uganda today are much higher than in very many secondary schools in Britain for the kids who get to a decent school. Okay. Anyway, okay, there's some pictures. The little bit of brief history of education in Uganda, I think I've done it actually. In the 1960s, there were only secondary schools in the main towns, largely staffed by young, naive British teachers who were learning as we went along. We trained and we were learning the job at the expense of the kids in Uganda. I mean, this is why I feel an obligation to Uganda, because I gained so much from that period. And the opportunity to put a little bit back is quite important. A lot of the people we taught are now the head teachers, the examiners. They run the National Curriculum Centre. You know, they're in quite important positions, or in the universities, in fact. The top schools at the time, this is a Catholic school. This is, St. Mary's College, Kisubi. A lot of the current Ugandan cabinet went to that school. So the religious schools were very important, as they are in Britain today. I mean, a lot of people think of the good schools as the good local Catholic school, the good local Protestant school. There's a whole debate about why they might be thought to be good, but, which I'm not going to go into because there isn't time. But there were certainly too few schools. And in 2000, we had the Millennium Development Goals, which were very much pushed through by Gordon Brown. The Gordon Brown unilaterally cancelled all the outstanding debts of Uganda and lots of other countries in Africa, debts to Britain, on condition that they introduced universal primary education, and there were a number of other conditions as well. So it meant that suddenly the government were pushing a lot of kids into primary school, and there were no secondary schools. And primary participation rose from 30% to 90% plus in a fairly short time. And then these kids came on wanting secondary education. 8 years ago, 10 years ago, only 25% of kids were in secondary school. And it's now growing. And it's grown because they've pioneered the educational model that Britain under Cameron has adopted for the United Kingdom. They set up free schools. They said anybody can set up a school in Uganda. And so who was in a position to set up schools? The churches set up schools. The evangelical Christians set up schools. Businessmen set up schools hoping to make money. And Cameron looked at the Ugandan model and thought, what a good idea, we'll do the same in Britain. So we've actually got the free school movement, which is modelled on Uganda. It isn't actually, but it's almost as if it was modelled on Uganda. But a lot of new schools are run by businessmen hoping to make money, essentially. And a lot of new schools were set up by evangelical groups. And so the humanist schools are different. So the first schools in Uganda were built by the missionaries. The Protestant Church of Uganda has 3-4 million kids enrolled in Protestant schools. Their aim is to equip the people of God with knowledge, attitudes and values for Christian living. To be fair, they're like a lot of the church schools in Britain, where they're basically good schools. A lot of them are good schools, and there's not a lot of heavy pressure on the religion within them. I mean, they may have prayers, but the evangelical schools are quite different, actually, where there is indoctrination going on. The Catholic schools, a similar mission. The evangelical Christian schools, the American churches, are certainly coming in teaching creationism, using beating to keep kids in line. The Muslim schools, Uganda is 80% Christian. It's a religious country, 80% Christian, 20% Muslim, roughly. There are a lot of Muslim schools. Muslims and Christians get on pretty well in Uganda, and do mix in the villages socially. But again, the aim of the Muslim schools is to, the concern is that Muslim children don't receive a proper grounding in the knowledge of Islam in a state school or another school, so they have Quranic studies within the Islamic schools. Okay, I'm going very fast, but now the humanists, when we met Peter Kisirinya, Moses Kamir and guys around at the time, their interest was to, they were humanist converts. So like all converts, they were rabid converts to humanism. And all of them saw humanism as about creating a good life for everybody. They never saw, if you talk to them, they never saw it to be anything to do with God. Unlike British humanist groups in Britain, who, from my experience, are absolutely obsessed by God and can't talk about anything but God and but the churches. And what I would like to see in Britain is every humanist group have a swear box. And every time anybody mentions God or church, they put £1 in and then send it to us at the end of the year. But the Ugandan humanists said it's about they're about creating a good society, and they wanted to do practical things. So Peter Kisirinya, who's the director of Isaac Newton School, was brought up in a peasant farming background. His parents and his extended family were were subsistence farmers, tenant farmers, although land ownership wasn't really relevant because land was held by the chiefs in the area. And Peter genuinely wanted to do something to help his community. I actually sat down with him in June, and it's odd really, we ended up crying together, which was quite bizarre. I mean, I will cry with anything now. Whenever I watch a film, I usually end up crying these days. But he said when he went off to school, to boarding school, his father, who we'd taken out to dinner in June, said to him, "Peter, why are we sending you to school? What's your aim in going to school? Is it to make a lot of money, or is it to do something to make your society better?" And that's all his father said to him, and then said goodbye. And Peter's thought about that, and it's very deeply ingrained that he wants to help his community. Moses is an interesting case because Moses was actually trained as a Catholic in a Catholic seminary, and he was a Catholic preacher, but he was converted by talking to Peter and the other humanists. So he's a rabid secularist, Moses in fact. When he graduated in history, he got a job teaching in a Catholic school, teaching history in a Catholic school, and one day one of the girls wasn't listening to his lesson, and she was reading instead of listening to the lesson. And he said, "Why are you reading? What are you reading?" And she was reading the Bible for succor during Lent, because she was giving up food for Lent. And so Moses went along to her, picked up the book, threw it out of the window, and the head teacher sacked him. Quite rightly, in my view, I think quite rightly. But he went off and started doing tutoring with the kids he'd been teaching in the school. Wrote to Caspar Melville, who was head of the Rationalist Association, director and editor of New Humanists at the time. And Caspar put out an advert, which some of you may have responded to, asking for support for this new mustard seed school. Moses had written to Caspar saying, "I founded a humanist school," and he hadn't actually. He was teaching a few kids under a tree. And Caspar naively, but it worked out well, raised £30,000 to build the first building for the school. And then a newcomer on the scene since 2010, Robert Bambali in Kasese in the west of Uganda near the Congo. Robert was brought up as an orphan, and he had a bad time in Catholic education in Uganda, and so he went right off religion. And he's had support from the American atheists to set up now 4 schools. He's now running 3 primary schools, and he's just starting a secondary school there. A very, very interesting guy. The aims of all of them was to do something practical to help their communities, to help impoverished rural communities, and in particular to help orphans. That's important because with the liberalisation of education in Uganda, all schooling has to be paid for. Even if you go to a state school, they ask you to they require you to make a contribution. So it's a little bit like the foundation schools in Britain. We'd like you to make a voluntary contribution of X, and if you don't, your child doesn't stay in the school. They wanted schooling that doesn't discriminate on grounds of religion or ethnicity or anything else. They wanted schools that respect science and basically produce self-confident, free-thinking children. I mean, although we said about the questions, and I really am pressed for time, if there's something you must say, do say it. This Uganda, that's Uganda. It's on Lake Victoria. Lake Victoria is 8 times the size of Wales. Wales is the common measuring rod for area, as you know. And Uganda is the size of, pretty well, it's the size of England and Wales together. It's pretty big. It's pretty big. And we are grossly overpopulated with 70 million and rising. Uganda has now got to about 34 million people. But it was only 7 million when we first went there in 1970, mind you. Isaac Newton School is here. Entebbe was the old colonial capital. Kampala is the current capital. Down here you've got Rwanda. So it's on this is the main road from Mombasa in Kenya through to Rwanda, and it's really out half an hour out in the sticks from the main road. And this is the Mustard Seed School is in the middle of Uganda. They're about 4 or 5 hours apart, depending on traffic conditions. And then the Kasese schools are over here, and here we're talking 10 to 14 hours from Kampala to get down there. Rural conditions. Uganda was the centre of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, which started, they're saying, in about 1972, when we were there. And they're suggesting that mass inoculation programs may have been part of the cause of the spread of HIV in the early days. But it was particularly spread along the lorry route from Mombasa to down to Rwanda, where the lorry drivers stopped, effectively. So it was very bad around the area of Isaac Newton School, but not around Mustard Seed School, which was off that route, in fact. When we were in Uganda in 1970, rural incomes in many ways were higher than they are today because they had coffee and cotton as cash crops. And both of those crops have been affected by disease or competition from elsewhere. They're all being affected by climate change. I mean, Uganda has a good climate, rain throughout the year in a lot of the area, but they're now getting long dry spells, and when the rain comes, it's absolutely torrential. We know there's no such thing as climate change. Of course, it's just odd weather. But so where do they get their income from? They get their income now, the rural farmers, from selling surplus food or selling a chicken, not from largely from selling cash crops. Education is the main hope of improvement, and the general practice in central Uganda is families tend to be big, 10 kids, but they're beginning to fall now. And they seem to try to educate the bright kids, whether they're boys or girls. And so if the girl is bright, she'll go into school ahead of the boy who's not so bright. And they'll try and put all their children in school to start with, and if they're struggling, they'll pull them out. But finding the school fee, when you have largely a subsistence income, an irregular income, and it's only from selling a little bit of surplus produce, it is very difficult to pay for schooling. Yeah. Oh yeah, you do get a problem. We've got a problem with the schools here of girls. Probably more girls are taken into year 1 than boys, but by the time you get to year 4, there are more boys than girls, because girls tend to be taken out for marriage. I mean, we're talking about the age group is, they come into secondary school at 14 and they're there 14 to 20. So they're older kids anyway. They're adults anyway. They're sexually active, they're sexually mature, and actually many are sexually active as well. So it's not surprising that that there are occasional pregnancies. The schools have they handle it pretty well actually, and the pregnancies are rare now. They do have sex education in the schools. So I'll focus on Isaac Newton. So Isaac Newton was a community initiative. This is Peter Kisirinya. That's Peter's mother, Gladys. And she grows coffee beans, and that's her harvest of coffee beans. This is the little bit of land they have around the house. And these are Peter's nieces and nephews. They started off with a link with the Norwegian humanists, with a pig project, to try and raise the local incomes by breeding pigs, giving local farmers a piglet, and then they would grow up the piglet, and then they would take around a sow and serve the piglet, and by magic you get more of them. And then the deal was they gave 2 back to the project. But the problem was they gave back the weaker ones, and so they ended up having to pay money to feed up the little piglets, and it really ran out of steam. The project ran out of steam. But what it did, the project, was get the community together. It was a community where they would meet regularly to talk about the project, and it got them talking, and led to them saying, why don't we build a school? And so they started making their own bricks from the soil, the local soil, drying and burning them. And when I first went there in 1976, there was essentially one building here. And this is the community. The picture is not very clear, but if you look closely at the pictures, they look poor. I mean, they've come out to a school meeting in their best clothes, and their best clothes are pretty poor. The women have got their smart dresses on. The transformation in 10 years has been remarkable, because by building up the school in the area, the school has created lots of jobs for teachers. The teachers live in rooms. They take rooms in the local villages and put income into the villages. They employ cleaners, they employ ground staff, they employ cooks that puts money into the community. The teachers come in on local transport, on motorbike taxis. That creates jobs. And you've seen in 10 years, the whole quality of life has improved in the area. It's how economists call it multiplier effects. There are multiplier effects from the school. Like a university creates jobs in the area, the school creates lots of jobs in the area. And the quality of clothing and just the whole feel of the community has changed in 8 or 10 years. This was the official opening of the school, in fact. When we decided to get involved, I mean, my background is education. My wife and I taught in Uganda from 1970 to 72, and I've been back on various projects since then. And my research with the Open University, looking at what determines the quality of schooling, then it's fairly obvious. The quality of schooling depends on the quality of kids in the school, the quality of teachers in the school, and then the teaching methods and resources. The buildings don't matter. They do matter. You've got to keep the rain out, but the buildings are the least important things. So we decided we would try and focus on things that improved the educational experience, the classroom experience of the kids, the learning experience. So we could make a difference by putting in books. Because a lot of the teachers are part-time, they come and go on a motorbike taxi. When the schools were starting out, they couldn't afford to employ a full-time chemistry teacher. So they'd employ somebody to come and give 4 lessons. And when they go away, if the kids need help, there's nobody to give them help. If there are books in the school, the kids can read. And it empowers them to learn independently. And similarly, to learn science by doing science. We've put a lot of money into equipment and in fact, Barry provided money to build a science lab at Isaac Newton School. And we've gradually increased the equipment in the science lab. And when we arrived in June, it was amazing because we just came unannounced on a Sunday, and the whole science lab was full of kids doing experiments that I couldn't understand. It was involving putting different numbers of batteries in a series and measuring resistance, how resistance changed. Completely lost on me, but they seemed to know what they were doing. We've put in computer networks, but not so they can learn computing, because that's a waste of time, but so they can use the Wikipedia resources, basically. They've got a huge non-fiction library there with an offline Wikipedia called Rachel, which is a vast non-fiction resource for them, and for the teachers as well. So the teachers can look up what they're meant to be teaching. Roger may have heard me say this before, but I was talking to one group of kids, and I said, if we could get you a little bit of money, what would you like? Just a little bit of money, what would you like? And one kid said, we want a science lab. I said, no, a little bit of money. And then one of the boys said, we have an African saying, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. Can we have some footballs? There's a lot of it's amazing how many sayings we've got from Africa. And similarly, we got the weekend from the French. So art materials as well. So, these are the things that, as humanists, we ought to be interested in empowering the kids to learn. And you do that through resources, making them independent of the teacher. Not saying that teachers are not important, because they are important. Learning science by doing science. This was the experiment with the resistors, and they're there with their calculators. And do you know this? Yeah. All right. And anyway, so now their prep rooms are well equipped. What we're doing now, just as what our charity is doing now, we're now providing about 150 scholarships across 2 schools and a little bit in Kasese School. We only now provide boarding scholarships. It's £300 a year, because we're finding the really needy kids, they're single and double orphans, who don't have good living conditions in the villages. And it's very important to get them into boarding, because they've got a safe environment where they can study in the evenings and at weekends. And they're doing so, we've just noticed over the years, the ones we can get into boarding do so much better in their exams than the ones who have to go home, they have to do chores. They may be abused, actually. If they're orphans, there's a lot of physical and sexual abuse going on. Whether you've lost one parent or 2 parents. Yeah. And they get fed. Yeah. Okay. So what we've done, we've actually moved. People were giving £120 day scholarships, and we've persuaded people to go over to boarding. Most people have, and going from 120 to 300 is a big jump. So we've given people the option of paying 150 and 2 people sharing the support for 1 child, which seems to be working quite well. We chose a different model from the Northeast Humanists, and I'm not. It's not a question of whether one is better than the other one, but we chose. It's been quite a hard option of sponsors sponsoring a named child. And that means that we give £300 to the school, we get a named child, we get their photograph, we get a little write-up on their background, and we send that to the sponsor, and we send an update each year, which we felt would motivate sponsors better. It's actually proved to be an absolute nightmare for us, getting all the information every year. And it's amazing how many kids drop out as well. And we've had to then explain to sponsors that the child you were supporting has been sent off and married to an old man. Maybe. But, I mean, that rarely, but the different things like that. How are we doing for time? So what we've increasingly recognised is the school is home. When most of the kids are now boarding, so school is home. Now that does affect the attitude towards religion, for example, because the kids are coming in, they're either Christians or Muslims, and they live in the school, and they're saying, we want to say prayers on Sunday. And so Peter and Moses said, well, it's your home, you can do that. And so they've got an hour of divinity on Sunday, and the Muslims have got facilities to pray on Friday. But it also means you've got to have things for them to do when they're there at the weekend. So they've got TVs, they can watch Premier League football. They know more about Premier League football than I do, certainly. And they watch films, and they play games, and they play chess, and
Work in science labs.
And they work in science labs. And they do things in the community as well. So creating a place. So this is Isaac Newton School as it's beginning to look nice. You're getting more and more buildings. They're trying to plant flowers and trees, and the schools are accepting a duty of care to students. So on each of the schools in the staff room, it says every student has the right to expect the highest standard of education, providing knowledge, skills and attitude needed for success in the modern world, a happy and purposeful schooling, teachers who strive hard to develop the capabilities of every student. One of the problems in Uganda, as used to be the case here, is it's very easy for teachers to teach to the brightest and forget the ones around the edges who are not taking it in. And that really is a big problem in Uganda. And in Uganda they mark negatively. They very rarely praise students. They just pick out what they've done wrong. And you realise what progress we've made in Britain actually on things like that, on monitoring student progress. I'm looking to the teacher over there. A safe and disciplined and caring environment which is free from physical and verbal abuse. One thing the Uganda Humanists fought with the government over was banning corporal punishment in schools. And these schools have done that. And it's now illegal anyway in Uganda, but hitting does still happen, and they have to be vigilant. I mean, Peter became aware of one teacher who was hitting kids, and we've had 2 training programs on, it's using guidance rather than violence in order to bring everybody into line. And so Peter's repeating the training course there. Just 1 or 2 case studies. This student, Lydia, she was a boarding student at Isaac Newton in Senior 4 O-level. She enjoyed science, was doing well in science, wanted to be a surgeon. She was a single orphan. Her home circumstances were difficult because her mother ran one of the local shops and was ill herself. She had a chest complaint. She had one sister. Her father had died of HIV/AIDS related things. The sister had been married off to an old man. The mother was finding it very difficult to cope, and she said her daughter would have to leave school. despite the fact that she was on a scholarship. And Peter went, well, I went with Peter to talk to the mother. And Peter said, but your daughter is the best girl in the school. She's going to get first-rate O-levels. She could do very well. And the mother said, I can't cope. She's the only person who can help me cope with life. And it's very, very hard, isn't it? The mother said, no, she either comes out of school or I disown her. And what do you do? Peter, well, me with Peter, rushed off to find the mother's brother. And Peter said to the brother, you can't let your sister pull her daughter out of school because she's doing so well. And eventually, she was persuaded to leave her in school. But it gives an indication of the sort of pressure. She came back into school, and she's taken her A-levels. Another lad, Bukenya Ashraf, he got the best O-level results in the school. His results were in the top 8% of kids in Uganda. So the humanist schools started small, but they're now beginning to produce good education for the top ones anyway. So he started A-levels in maths, physics, chemistry, biology, general studies, wanted to be a surgeon, star student, and then the surviving parent died. His surviving parent died, and he had to leave school. He became a double orphan. He was taken in by an old boy of the school who was a boda boda rider. Boda boda is a motorbike taxi. And the boda boda rider tried to pay for his schooling for a time, but he couldn't keep it up, so he withdrew. And we wrote this up in a report, and one of our supporters said, well, I'll pay for his schooling. And he came back in, but he missed most of his lower sixth year. He got a scholarship, and he finished with 3 A-levels, C, D, and E. He got a place in university, but as soon as he had to pay university fees, he dropped out. So what Peter has done is taken him into the school as an assistant teacher so that he can try and raise some money to go back to university. But these are all the things that are going on in the schools. This one makes me cry, actually. Joseph and Mike were close friends who studied together. They gained A's and B's in science A-levels. And they really do have the gold standard in Uganda. You know, they've got our old syllabuses, basically. And the standards are, an A in Uganda is an A. Not like, it's got to be an A triple star here to be an A. They got A's and B's at A-level. They went to university together. They did a degree in, it's a quasi-medical degree in dietetics and nutrition. I mean, I said to them, how could you have got these results in this school? Because you've got part-time teachers, poor resources. And they said, well, we've always been friends. We go to class together. We compare notes that the teacher's given us at the end of the class. We go to the textbooks, fill in the gaps. We go to Rachel on the network to fill in more gaps. We get hold of past papers. We see if we can do the questions, and then ask the teacher any that we can't. It's model revision technique, really, and they did well. They both got first-class honours degrees last year, and they're now doing master's degrees. This is what Mike said. I can't read it because I just cry. You read. Can you see it? And he meant that genuinely. Okay. So that's another story. The Isaac Newton School.
How many universities are there in Uganda?
How many?
How big are
there are a lot of universities in Uganda because they liberalised education, so anybody can start a university.
How big are they, say, compared with universities we have in this country?
Well, Makerere University, the top one, I don't know, it probably has 20,000 students. You know, and yet there are tiny ones as well. But there are a lot of universities in Uganda now. So the site development started off with a couple of buildings, and year by year, more and more buildings. It's a very attractive site. It's on the side of a hill, and over beyond the woods is Lake Victoria, and you get these wonderful lake breezes in the afternoon. And then this is 2013. This is, let me get this right. This is the science lab which Barry was involved in raising the funding for. And also this is the classroom block here, which Barry raised the funds with IHU for. This is a Google Earth map. You can just about find the school on Google Earth. But the latest Google Earth map was 2013, and unfortunately it was cloudy at the time, so it's not very clear. But you can see that was the original building. This is the cookhouse now. There's now a new boys' hostel there. These are the classroom blocks. The girls' hostel, there's now a new girls' hostel here. And the site now looks like that. So boys' hostel, girls' hostel. The girls had a competition to name the new girls' hostel, and they chose Malala Yousafzai Hostel. The kids themselves searched the internet for girls and women of note, and then they had a vote, and it was a very close call between her and a Nigerian female writer. But it was very good to see the competition. And you got toilets, library, hall, classrooms. There's a clinic now because it's very important to take care of the health of the children when they're living there. There's 300 people. There's 500 in the school now, so you got 200 or 300, and so the nurse in the school can test blood for malaria with the dipstick test, give them the latest combination drugs which they administer from the school, and do all the gastroenteritis things as well. And this is the thing that we just about raised the money for, which is a new 4-classroom block, which will have Ian Gurney laboratory in there. And he's going to have ceilings in, so that the teacher in this room can't hear what the teacher in the other room is saying, because all the other classrooms are open over the top, see. And we've actually put ceilings in the hostels so that mosquitoes can't bite a child in one room and go over and bite, one in the next room. The schools are works in progress. I realise I'm overrunning a bit. What we're trying to do at present, Isaac Newton, currently we've raised the funds to put in mains electricity to take it from the grid to the school and to 5 villages around the school. That's cost about £10,000. We're increasing water storage. Water storage is a huge problem. And so we've just found money for 3 10,000 litre tanks to store rainwater from the roofs. New classrooms, new computer lab, refurbishing the boys' hostel, need a second boys' hostel. Mustard Seed School, which I've neglected. Mustard Seed School is in a semi-arid marginal area where every 3rd year there's a complete crop failure. And last year people died in the area from starvation. And so we've just, we thought of all sorts of things to do, but we've done a deal to break quite illicitly into a pipeline that the Speaker of the Parliament, the woman, put to her own village. And it should have been distributed more widely. It's drawing water from the Nile, and we're burrowing into her pipe and bringing pressurized water to Mustard Seed School into a high tank, so it will then distribute water around the school. That will solve. They'll have mains water then, as long as Madam Kadaga doesn't discover. Madam Kadaga is the Speaker of Parliament who led the anti-gay movement in Uganda. So it's quite good to take her water, I think. Back up, anyway, you can see that. But the other area, this is the last thing, other areas of school improvement, schools have got 500 kids in now, so we need more and more books, more and more science materials, more and more art materials. We have a Reading for Pleasure project, so we're putting in books for reading. We had in Isaac Newton School, we had this superb competition where the kids had to spend a month reading a book that they'd chosen that was not on their syllabus. And then there was an open competition where they had to give a summary, just off the cuff, summary of the book is about so-and-so and this happened, this happened, so on. They had to read a little bit. There was a panel of judges who could ask them the meaning of words and various other things. And then there were other bits and pieces, and then they chose a winner, and all the winners got big dictionaries, which they were really very proud of. We're going to pay for next year for all fourth-year children to go to visit a national park and see the animals, which they study the national parks in geography, but it will be a geography field trip. And you know, it's just so important. Uganda is tremendous for wildlife, and it's part of the syllabus, but for the kids to go and see that. We did it at Isaac Newton last year, and for the kids to see elephants and to see hippos and to see crocodiles is amazing. Those things. Staffing is a huge problem because the schools are run on a shoestring and the pay levels are very, very low. The steps forward now are that 3/4 of the teachers are now on contracts. They're now enrolled in the National Social Security Scheme, so they get money going towards a pension. We pay them a bonus of 1 month's pay at the end of every year. But the schools only pay them when they're teaching. So because there's 3 months holiday, they only paid for 9 months. Next year, they're going to pay them over 12 months. Because the big problem is retention, is keeping staff on board. Mustard Seed are introducing a savings scheme where teachers can put aside 10,000 shillings a month, which is £2.50. And it will accumulate towards something for Christmas. But they can pool their savings and borrow from each other, which the teachers are very keen on. And I think I'm going to stop there. Okay, a lot of... Yeah, I say a lot of the time we've been working with the schools, it's been a case of expediency. You know, when you're starting a school from scratch, are there teachers? Are there kids? Are there teachers? Do they know what they're doing? Thinking about humanism is the last thing that Peter and Moses and the other people want to do, because they've got to think, there's nobody in front of that class. Where do we get a teacher from? We've no water. You know, there's no water in the school. And I think only now are we beginning to get to the stage where the basic infrastructure is beginning to be there, that they can step back a little bit and think about what they're doing. So I'm moving. I've got to think about the camera. So we organised a couple of years ago the first Humanist Teachers Conference. And it was to get the teachers from the different schools to talk to each other and to get them out of their school, well, all in one school, to think about what they're doing. And that was very successful. And then on the strength of that, we put a proposal to IHU and got money for a humanist ethos project. And it was run by, well, Moses was the fund holder, but they had meetings in Mustard Seed School, in Isaac Newton School, in the Kasese School, and then they all came together in a big conference. And as a result of that, they've developed a set of guidelines for a humanist school. What are the features of a humanist school? And they've put together some documents. They put documents together that new teachers will sign, saying if you join this school, we expect you to behave in this way and not in this way. And they've also got some PowerPoints that they can all use on teaching humanism, the principles of humanism, to their staff, because most of their staff are Christians or Muslims, and you're not going to get them to change. You want a geography teacher, you don't say, are you Christian, Muslim, or human? If you said humanist, you wouldn't get anybody. I'll say a little bit about this, and I'll obviously say it quickly. The aim was to establish some overarching principles for humanist schools, to derive guidelines for school governance, to develop a sense of shared ownership across the schools, and to prepare prepare materials for teachers, students, and for the community, because Peter has been going out talking to members of the community about what the ethos of the school is as well, and talking to them quite straight about this is not a religious school. So the challenge is shaping an inclusive humanist vision in multi-faith student communities. This is a picture of the Isaac Newton School gathered together. That's my wife talking to them. But one of the things that's happened with Isaac Newton is it's becoming quite a successful school. It's getting good O-level results now. In fact, it's about the 6th best results in the district of 30 schools at present. And Mustard Seed is the same. It was 5th best school in the district at O-level. A-level results are pretty ropey at present, but they're getting some kids getting high grades, but the average is fairly poor. But they're attracting now kids from other schools. The nearest secondary school to Isaac Newton is a Muslim school, and they're attracting a lot of kids from the Muslim school now who want to come for the better education that Isaac Newton is offering. So what do you say about humanism? You're faced with a group of Christians, 80% Christians, 20% Muslims. And I've got to say what humanism is. Do I begin by saying, humanists don't believe in God? Because if you do, you've lost them. You've just lost them completely. So what do you do? Or do you even say humanists are agnostic? They don't know. We're not really quite sure about things.
Do you get asked the direct question by kids saying, do you believe in God?
Yeah.
So how do you deal with that?
Well, I used to hedge it, but I now say no, I don't. I usually explain why, but it's a bit more than that. I now say no.
Can you not say some do and some don't?
You can say all sorts of things, but I mean, we have. I didn't used to talk about humanism in the schools when I went there. I do now. I mean, when we have an international friendship visit every 2 years, and I always give a lecture on humanism to the whole school. And this time in June, I gave one to the teachers on their own as well. But I spend a lot of time thinking about how I say it. And so this is an indication of what I do. You may not like it, but this is the signboard for Isaac Newton High School. It says, the motto of the school is to reason, not to believe. Okay? The local imam came to the school. It says it's a secular school somewhere, a secular school. The local imam came to the school and said, "What does secular mean?" And Peter took him round the school, trying not to answer. And eventually they came out, and the imam, on leaving, said, "I now understand. Yours is a school without God." Now, it's all well and good to say, yeah, that's fine, but that's taken straight into the community, and you can get parents withdrawing their kids from the school, and it happened with the Humanist Academy, actually, which I'm not going to go into. But Mustard Seed School, they have signs around the school, some quite funny ones. We aim to create a school in which children learn thinking skills, positive discipline, and a lifelong value system. To create a school where teachers feel valued and are committed to a positive learning experience. And then we've got things like, there's a Scout Club, Games and Sports, Straight Talk Club, Young Achievers Club, Entrepreneurs Club, Environmentalist Club spelt incorrectly. There's a Scripture Union in both schools, but there's also a Skeptical Union at Isaac Newton School. And there's a Humanist Society at Isaac Newton School. A violence-free childhood is everyone's right. Say no to discrimination of women. Avoid sugar daddies, mummies, and to live a good life. Sex does not make breasts and bums to grow. You don't find these in British schools, do you, somehow? Because for some strange reason, Ugandan men think that breasts and bums are very attractive. We wouldn't. And what young men tell the girls, the virgins, is, if you have sex with me, your breasts and your bum will grow, and you'll be more attractive. And I, when I saw this, I said, Moses, you can't put that on a wall. You may think it, but you can't possibly write it on a wall. And he said, the parents are very happy that it's on there, because the parents know it's a problem, and they know we're fighting it. And a lot of what they're fighting is local superstition and belief. And that's more of an issue than Christianity, Islam. And well, there was a big poster in Kampala by the main road with a very presentable middle-aged man, businessman. And it said, would you be happy with this man sleeping with your daughter? So why are you sleeping with his? And what Uganda is very good about is they've been open about the problems. HIV, in South Africa they hid it. Uganda's talked about the problem and they've got over it. You know, they brought the HIV rate in Kampala down from 32% to 3%. You know, and they've had little cartoons in the local newspaper, a little cartoon strip of a man looking very worried outside the clinic. He's going for an AIDS test. And he knocks on the door and goes in. And he comes out jumping up and down because he's HIV negative. And in the fourth frame, he whistles over two prostitutes. Two prostitutes. Oh, no one. Kasese Humanist Primary School, there isn't time to talk about it. It's an interesting one. But Robert Wambali is creating humanism as a religion. When we first visited the school, the kids were holding up signs saying, I'm a rational thinker. I believe in science. And it was complete. I was cringing, actually. It was just over the top. But he has on the wall in the staff room pictures of Dawkins, for example. And well, Nelson Mandela, who's thought of as a humanist, and various other people. But there are signs all over the place. We're proud to think for ourselves. Humanist school practices, they have an open recruitment policy. Humanist schools are open to all children. They don't discriminate on grounds of religion. They employ teachers of all faiths and none. Well, in fact, there's none of no faith to speak of. None of the schools have religious assemblies. Kasese schools will not allow religious symbols. So crosses are not allowed in school, headscarves are not allowed in school. Humanism at Kasese is a subject on the curriculum. You know, can you imagine Friday afternoon having to teach humanism for 3 to 4 o'clock before the kids go home? It would be a nightmare. Isaac Newton School, Peter has chosen to allow religious symbols because he says humanists don't believe in indoctrinating. You must make your own mind up. If you wear a cross, come with a cross. If you want a headscarf, come with a headscarf. But Peter's constantly, when he's talking to the kids, dropping little messages to them to get them to think about things. Mustard Seed School also allows religious symbols. Moses has changed his mind because he used to, if he saw a girl, usually a girl wearing a cross, he would say, "You're in school now, hide your cross, put it down your blouse." But now he doesn't seem to bother, and I think it's the boarding that's done it, that it's, the school is their home. He's had a sceptical union. Now religion is in the formal curriculum. Like Britain, all schools, there's only one compulsory subject in Britain, and that's religious education, which fortunately most schools ignore. But in Uganda, schools have to do religious education. And the old syllabuses, they had to do either IRE or CRE, Islamic religious education or Christian religious education. One was Bible studies and the other was Quranic studies. And I've been in a lesson where they say, 12 apostles, right? You name the third one, name the second one. You sort of like the people used to teach commerce, the 10 functions of the wholesaler. But there's a new curriculum coming in now, which is being fashioned with help from a group from Britain who were involved with the RE framework in Britain. So there's a now combined religious education, which is more a comparative RE, being phased in from the first year now. The impact of boarding, well, I've said this, an hour of devotion on Sundays. Muslim students have been allowed to construct a prayer room at their own cost. What do they hear about humanism? Talks by school directors. We've put books in the library on humanism, which they may or may not read. That nice book by Michael Rosen. Student societies, talks when we go on International Friendship Weeks. We took a humanist element from Germany, and she talked a lot about what she does as a humanist counsellor in Germany with the kids. School policies, students are represented on decision-making bodies, but by and large, humanism is presented positively. I mean, in general in Britain, if you ask people, are you a humanist? They'll say, yeah, I don't believe in God. It's so often defined negatively. But there it's defined positively. Humanism values all human beings. It doesn't discriminate, supports democracy and human rights, promotes personal and social responsibility, encourages rationality, celebrates human achievement in science, arts, music, cares for individual society, the environment, future generations. It's relevant to all human beings. Why do we need to mention God? Where did the universe begin? It's either the finger of God, which sounds a bit ridiculous to me, or a Big Bang, which sounds equally ridiculous. So positive humanism, we talk about positive humanism, is a philosophy capable of drawing together human beings of all beliefs, it should be possible, and this is where I think the BHA have gone wrong, it should be possible to embrace positive humanism whether you're an atheist or an agnostic or a Christian or a Muslim or anything else for that matter. What we should be about is finding the common core of beliefs in a good society that we can get everybody to subscribe to.
Impossible.
Well, at least we can try.
That's quite daft.
At least we can try. You're entitled to your point of view, but you're wrong. So the schools demonstrate it's possible by focusing on empathy. What are the important things? The most important word in humanism is empathy. Being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and understand where they're coming from. They subscribe to the 10 commitments: altruism, caring for the environment, rational thinking, empathy, ethical development, global awareness, human rights, etc. What the schools are doing practically is trying to engage the students in their communities. So there is an Isaac Newton Humanist Students Association which is going out into the villages and helping needy families with hygiene training, hand washing, improving local toilets, screens for washing, making drying racks. And they're very proud. They've helped 20 local families, a lot of women on their own where the men have gone off and left them coping with a lot of children. Coping with a lot of children. Isaac Newton have just formed an Isaac Newton Community Association with the local peasant farmers. And this is where the school is the focus on trying to improve the conditions for local farming. So they've actually set aside a building where they're buying bulk produce, bulk seed, fertilizers, pesticides, organic materials, and selling them at cost to local farmers. And this is humanism in action. Mustard Seed are raising chickens to try and increase the protein in the diet. Teachers must sign this pledge. In accepting a teaching position at this school, we agree to work to create a tolerant, caring community based on mutual respect, refrain from all forms of physical and verbal violence towards students. I will strive to teach with creativity and variety, understand that the students learn through inquiry and action, use only positive discipline, promote student self-esteem and pride, recognise that every child matters. That's it. Tumazi, as they say in Uganda, Tumazi is finished before 1:45. So questions now.
We really haven't got time for questions, actually. We unfortunately have to be out. It's just one of these things. But, I can say that the Ugandan Humanist Schools Trust has an excellent website. And if you just Google that, you can get straight into it.
There's some leaflets back there on the table.
Leaflets on the table.
Can I just make one observation while Steve's with us? So much of this has been possible through his energy and initiative. He's never stopped raising money, running around the country as a local student. He's been really a great source of energy.
Well, it's very, very good of you to say, Roger, it's good of you to say that, but you know yourself, lots of people have been involved. So, for example, the hostel that we've just finished at Isaac Newton was funded three-quarters was funded by St. Louis Ethical Society in America.
3,000.
Yeah. So, and you yourselves have done a lot over the years.